Hello, I want to give a quick demonstration of how Power Query by Microsoft might be used by schools to help simplify their data burden. This demonstration is mainly about Power Query, but it will also touch on a number of Excel features such as those listed there. First of all, just want to say, try and get a database system that actually does all you need so that you don't have to resort to taking data out into Excel to provide you with the summary information you need. Go for Schools is an excellent example of such a system. However, all systems fall short, and at some point you'll end up with data in Excel that you want to analyze in a particular way. So let's have a look at a typical mark sheet that you might get out of, say, Sims or Go in some cases. So typically you've got one row per student, and then you've got columns telling you what the value in the cell represents. So the blue columns are reading, you've got writing, maths, and then you've got some behavior, different types of behavior with a count of how many incidents have happened for each one. You've got the data for each term in each case, and for the purposes of the example, we're just interested in those. So I refer to this as wide format data because you've got one row per pupil. We've got 224 pupils in total, and we've got quite a few columns. There's drawbacks of this format, and there's benefits of changing the format of the data to be in a long format. In this case, we've got very few columns and many more rows. Obviously very difficult to get it into that format unless you know about Power Query, which is a fantastic tool for doing so. I'll show you the benefits of using data in this format, but first of all let me just go back to what we're used to, which is wide format data, and using that perhaps in a pivot table and in a chart to create summary data. If you're not used to pivot tables, get to know them. They're worth knowing about. I'll be providing some links at the end to some resources that might interest you. But we'll assume that you're familiar with Power Pivot tables, and that you kind of roughly know what's going on. For those of you who don't, basically they count. So I've set this pivot table up by dragging this text here, which represents the columns in the wide format table, into this area here, which defines the pivot table. And at the moment it's just counting the kids, so it's showing 224 kids are in the school, but I could break that count down by gender by adding gender to the rows, or I could take the reading autumn and add it to the rows, and now you're getting the reading autumn level 0 to 6 and how many kids are on that. I could incorporate the gender as a column to do a female male breakdown, or if I prefer I could put it here underneath the level, or switch them around. So it gives you a way of summarizing it. As I change that pivot table, because this chart here is linked to it, it was changing to represent in a graphical way the data, which is all great. It's fantastic, really useful stuff. But the key point I want to bring your attention to is I'm currently define this pivot table to analyze reading in the autumn. What if I want to analyze reading in the spring? Well, obviously we get rid of reading autumn and we put reading springing, but we've actually had to change the definition of the pivot table, and quite frankly it's not a good way of doing things, and Excel is not going to like you for working like that and won't be able to give you back much in return. Okay, so if we use the long format data, what are the benefits? Well, here's an example of a dashboard I've created. It's based on that long format data. It's got 4 different charts, but perfectly easy to create another one, and I'll show you how to do that later. It's got on the right hand side slices, again, which are really easy to create, and I'll touch on that. But the charts have been defined to show a particular piece of information, and here, for instance, it's showing levels by gender, so levels 1 to 9, 1 to 7 for each subject in the school, and the lines here represent how many girls and how many boys have actually got that particular level. If I wasn't interested in a gender breakdown, I can use the slices only to show information about females. So all those charts are now turned to females. If I wanted to look at female with action special needs, I've now got that, or no special needs. So in other words, it's very easy to change what the charts look like just by clicking on these slices. Fantastic. But the key to doing this is using Power Pivot, Power Query rather, to reformat the data into long format. Just to give you an insight into how this was created, basically each one of these charts is a copy of a chart on a separate sheet. So here's that chart that I copied and placed on the dashboard sheet here, and this chart is based on a pivot table here, which takes the data from the long data, structures the data, represents it, and then lets you do whatever your charts. There's another sheet for each of those charts defined in a similar way, and on the dashboard these are just a copy of that chart, so it's using data in a pivot table, and in addition I've created these slicers which allow you to filter. They're linked to the underlying pivot tables and they change how the chart works. Good stuff. However, you need long format data. So how to get this? Well, as you can see, the wide format data is in a good table structure. It's got a column heading for each one, and I've actually converted it to a Excel table, which you need to do by pressing that button there, and I've done that already. And then simply you get the Power Query add-in, which I'll give you links to show you how to install, and then you need to start working with the existing data in an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm just going to say I want to work with the from table, and this tool lets you take the data, which it's now showing in Power Query, and it lets you change it. So first of all, let's just get our heads around it. Well, we don't need the behavior columns because I'm not interested in those for the current analysis I'm doing. It's not about behavior, so let's get rid of them. So I'm going to simply select all the behavior columns, and actually that end column as well, which I'm not interested in, and then I'm going to delete them, and it's now displaying that they've gone. Notice it created a step over here. So if I click on source, that's the original data as it came from Excel. If I click on remove columns, it's showing me what's happened after that step's been performed. So what you're using this tool to do is record a series of steps that can be applied to data, so that you can recreate a new look or a new feel to the data and use the data effectively. So I want to kind of flip this data. At the moment I've got one line per pupil. I want to take these columns here and do what Microsoft refer to as unpivoting. So in fact, yeah, unpivot. So this is now taken all the column headings and it's put the column headings here. So every child, so we notice we've got more than one record per child now, but every child has got one row for every column heading that they had data for, along with the data value there. So some kids have got more rows than others because some kids were missing their maths in autumn and all this sort of thing. But essentially that's kind of what we need, and then I'd rename this column into well, it's subject and which term. So that's a problem. So let's split that, and again there's a button up here that lets you do that. We're going to split by a delimiting character, which in this case is space. So there's the space, and we're only going to do the very first one. I'll OK that, and that will make it into two columns. So here we are. That's now subject. That's now term. And it's worth mentioning at this point, if you can get data in a long format from your main database, then use that, because it's the best way of doing things. This is a bit of a messing around, but it's obviously very useful when you can't get data in that format. Sims will not give you data in the format you need. If it does, it's going to be very awkward to use. Go for Schools is able to give you data in a good format because it's fundamentally got a really good design that will enable you to do that. You might need to ask them to help you with it, but it will do it. Okay, so well, that's the data as we need it. There's nothing else there I need to change. And at this point I can close the query tool. Close the query tool, keep, and what's that going to have done? Right, what it does is it creates a new sheet for me. Here we are, sheet 18. I'm going to move that over next to the wide format data. So there's the source data. When I click on the table and create a Power Query, the results of the Power Query are put into a new sheet. Now, any time, and that's how I created the long format data. So long, I'll just call it long 2 for now. But when I created this sheet, that's exactly the process I went through. and it is the same layout, same format and everything. It's worth saying that if the source data changes, so for instance, if surname 1 stops being action and you reload the data, or any of the data changes for that matter, this sheet hasn't updated yet. Look, it's still action, but it's possible to either refresh that query or refresh everything, and lo and behold, student number 1 has now lost their action plus special needs status. So in other words, once you've created a workbook that moves the wide format data into a long format and then has all the charts and pivot tables and things, all you need to do is give the workbook the most up-to-date data, and hey presto, you're away. And you can automate that process of giving a spreadsheet data, but that's another topic. So here's your long format data. Let's look at an example of a pivot table based on long format data and why it's different to what we did before. Let's just recap though. So with the wide format, we had the difficulty that we kept on having to drag reading autumn, reading spring into here to define it. Well, we don't have that problem anymore with long format data. Check this out. So here's one I made earlier, and as you can see, I've put term and subject as filters. So that means they'll appear up here, and I can choose which subject or subjects I want to view and which term I want to view. And I'm not having to change the definition of the pivot table. It knows what to do. So at the moment, this has got gender in the columns. There are male, female. It's got level down there, and I can interpret this by looking at it to say it's autumn maths, which is fine. It's great. I wouldn't really want to print this though, because it's messy, and if all I wanted was charts, well, then it's not got the title on it or anything. So let me show you how to change that. I'm going to create a chart for special needs use. So let's put the special needs there. We've now got a bar chart that's showing level and how many kids with special needs or not are on that level. And that's pretty much what I want to do. But I want to put this chart on my dashboard. So I'm going to take this here, I'm going to copy it, go to my dashboard screen, put it at the bottom there, and then get rid of these buttons because I don't want people interfering with it. There we go, they've all gone. There's my dashboard screen. It's now got this. However, these slices that I put on aren't linked to that chart. It doesn't know about it. So I need to do that. Right, so here's the PT long example. There's the pivot table. Incidentally, the pivot table I've named pivot table example. So when in the dashboard, I now need to go to these slices, connect them to pivot table example, each one in turn, or I can select more than one at the same time, I think, but for now I'll just do it like this. And what that means is that when someone using a spreadsheet clicks on these slices, it will now affect this chart. So if I take it to just be action plus and statement, I'm pressing the Control T to do that. This is now a bar chart that's showing just action plus kids, what level they're at in the terms selected. So I'm only interested in autumn term, autumn term, there we go. And let's say I want to look at maths. So this whole page now is about maths, special needs, autumn. And there's the one I've added. Quite easy. Now, if you haven't got long format data, you simply can't do this. You can't use these slicer tools effectively. Let me show you how to add a slicer, because it really is dead easy. You have to click on a pivot table. You then go to the design and click insert slicer. Let's say I wanted to add another one by level, say. There's the pivot table. It's created that. It's showing me lots and lots of values in ghosted. Well, that's just saying that they no longer exist. So I'll just do that for now. This, if I right click and show report connections, it's currently only linked to the pivot table clicked on. I'm going to link it to all of those other pivot tables. I'm then going to cut that and put it into the dashboard here, and sure enough, if I clear all the filters, we can see what goes on. So if I'm only interested in level 1 reading, level 1 and 2, or alternatively, what you might want to do is kids that have actually got result and ignore the level 0s, which is obviously kids without data. You get the idea. It's fantastic, isn't it? So it actually doesn't take long to create this. Not only that, but it's reusable every term. Before you create it, you need to give thought to what you need, design it as you see fit. This is obviously only a taster to how things work. There's some very useful sites out there that will actually help you understand Excel more. I particularly like on YouTube, Excel is Fun. The guy's done 2,000 videos. He's a Microsoft valued person. He works in education as a teacher. He trains students in all sorts of business related things, and he uses Excel to demonstrate. But he's also got really, really useful videos on loads of different aspects of Excel, including particularly interesting the Power Query, which covers using Power Query as I did there, but also lots of videos about using pivot tables and the latest version of pivot tables, which is really hot topic. If you don't know about Power Pivot, go and find out, because it really rocks, and you don't need to use VLOOKUP anymore. Say enough? Have I said enough? Hope so. I'll leave you to it. Bye.